most important point I want to make right now is about representation and freedom of movement, because you, sir, you live in Tel Aviv. You are able to travel to London to represent yourself.
The BBC show. I mean, I was there in my capacity as a former Pentagon employee, a former Pentagon official. I work on Middle East issues. I work on defense issues. I understand the military aspect of it. And so I was there to talk about that. But when the former ambassador, the former Israeli ambassador to the UN started speaking in very, I thought, misleading terms, you know, really making it out as if he was talking about Hamas, but of course using very dehumanizing language, very stereotypical language, kind of making it seem like everybody in Palestine, everybody in Gaza was the way that he was describing. And I just felt like I couldn't stay quiet. It was not acceptable to me to see a group of people being spoken about in this way at such a high profile platform like BBC Newsnight, and not be able to say something in their defense and to clarify that this is a very one-sided conversation that's happening. Well, I mean, in terms of the way that the Western media has been covering this conflict and sort of the conversations that have been happening in policy circles in the West around the conflict, has been perceived by many, including, you know, especially Palestinians, as being very skewed, as not really offering them much of a perspective to say their part. So when it comes to sort of what comes next and the possibilities that we're looking at, I would say that other than the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now and negotiations over the humanitarian situation and the hostage situation, probably the top priority in Western governments and the region is preventing this conflict from turning into an all-out regional war that would not benefit anybody in the region, certainly not the Lebanese people if Israel decides to attack Hezbollah, because if you remember that after the 2006 war, and I was in Lebanon in 2007, and I remember this quite clearly, that the Israelis said the next time this happens, we are not going to differentiate and distinguish between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. So next time it's going to be on everyone. So that's a hugely, and you know that has to be at the back of Hezbollah's mind. They know the type of response that Israel is prepared to do if they escalate. So it's not in the interests of Lebanon or the Lebanese people. It's certainly not in the interest of Israel for this to go into an all-out regional war, because then it might find itself fighting on two fronts, one with Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, and of course the continuing one with Hamas on their other border. So when it comes to what's happening in the region right now, you can see how all of the different players are trying to sort of maintain this very delicate balance between sort of putting pressure on the other. So we saw in the last couple of days Iranian proxies striking US interests in Syria and Iraq, and then yesterday the US responding back. But if you read closely the response, the press statement from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in the US, and you look at the language that was used in that statement, it was so deliberate and so clear that the US is saying, we don't want this. We don't want a regional war. It described the US response as a targeted precision strike in self-defense, and we do not want this war. So everybody's being really careful right now. The last thing I'll say about this, though, is as we saw in 2006 as well, that the slightest miscalculation could spark a war that nobody wants. So in 2006, when Hezbollah kidnapped those soldiers and brought them across the border, they had done that before. That wasn't something new. So they didn't realize what kind of response. They didn't realize that that was going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back for Israel, so to speak. And that's what I fear right now, is not only that the very prospect of a miscalculation itself is dangerous. What's even more dangerous is that no one knows what that one action might be that will spark the regional war that no one wants.